Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Eliot.
And last time we said we were going to have our new segment this time. And spoiler, we're not.
Yeah, you lied. You
We lied. It's our first official podcast lie.
There you go. It's a milestone of sorts.
Welcome to the day we let you down.
And get used to it because this isn't the only one.
Our new segment is We Let You Down. No, for a variety of reasons, it would be far too boring to go through. We're pushing that to the next episode.
Oh, but I do have a consolation prize, though.
Oh, really?
Yes, I have.
Is it a pinata?
No, I have one awkward interview that I will share.
Oh, we're going to share one of the ones.
Yes,
okay, that's fair.
So we're not we're only half letting people down. So we got this awkward interview.
Have I heard this one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I'll try and keep it G-rated if that gives you any kind of indication of the story. But so this person was applying for a position on, believe it or not, a board of directors.
Okay.
And walked into the room where they were being interviewed, and there were 10 people there.
Okay.
And so we were told that 10 people, evenly divided, 5 men, 5 women. And one of the questions was, I'll keep it G-rated. How does it go? Okay, said the main person to the applicant. Marry, bang, kill. Point to the people in the room.
Wait, I'm sorry. What?
Do you remember if you've heard that?
No,
game?
I know what you're referring to. That's not my confusion. I've heard a less G-rated version of it.
Yes, but there were 5 men, 5 women around the conference room interviewing this person for the board of directors, and the question was: marry, bang, kill. Point to people in the room.
Did this person already know those people? What sorting criteria are you supposed to use?
I guess for better or for worse, the way we get a lot of these is through social, and we don't have follow-up questions.
Because I have questions.
Oh, there are a lot of questions.
It's so many questions.
Yes, but anyway, so that I think that does fit under the category of awkward.
Yeah, that's super awkward because honestly, it makes me wonder if the correct answer is to refuse to answer, or to get up and leave, perhaps. It's almost like a trick question, potentially.
It can be, and that's an interesting point. Maybe, like Groucho Marx said, I don't want to be a member of a country club that would invite me. So. Yes, it's from the 1950s and it still hits.
I hadn't heard that one. That's cool.
But maybe it's, we really don't want somebody that would sit through this horrible of an interview.
Wow, so many questions. Okay, I'm going to have to drag myself away from that, or this will become our episode.
Okay, so
it's really close.
Then let me transition and thank our patrons.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Tom Loveland and Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, Herbert and Ethel Inc., and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions.
All right. So I'm cleansing my brain of that other story because I really want to keep talking about that, but I'm going to shake it off and we'll launch into our actual story for the day.
And you have one, right?
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
All right. You're up.
So here's my story. It's actually really short because it's more just sort of a moment. I was visiting one of my absolute favorite clients back when I very first met him. And he pulls out, we were just talking about, what are you up to? What are you trying to do more of? What matters? Why am I here? Why'd you call me? Right. What does it feel like we need to work on? Whatever. And he pulls out this binder and it has, I don't even know how many tabs, and each tab was like a category of life, whether it's family or business or physical, or so it was almost like a life planning binder. Each category then had 3 sections in each on the page for 3 main goals for that category of your life. And then each of those goals had sort of action steps and whatnot. And even remembering it right now, I remember the physical overwhelm I was feeling looking at, because
I was thinking the same thing.
Oh
wow.
my God. And so that's almost the end of my story. So it's not a terribly interesting story in and of itself, but more of a kind of prompt. because I cannot think of a better example of something that sparks up the love-hate relationship that I have with planning and goals. And because I love the exercise of doing something like that, like to actually spend the time to say like, okay, what are my top 3 goals with my kids? What are my top 3 goals with my husband? What are my top 3 goals for me personally? And even that breaks down into physically, intellectually, I think it's useful, but then to come back from that and actually have 3 goals for every one of those categories, it's like, like, holy crap. And so it started with that. So I have a very much like planning is important, but then how do you distill it down into something important? And then the other day when I was walking, I had this sort of epiphany, which for myself, which came up out of my own sort of struggle with some things that were frustrating to me that I couldn't do of my own aspirations and whatnot. And so what I wanted to talk about was this idea I came up with, it may not be mine, of while it's important to identify goals per se or aspirations, I think it might almost be more important or at least useful to also go through the process of identifying like minimum goals. So
why is that?
Okay, yes. I suspected I would get your furrowed brow like, huh? What? I don't know what we're talking about. So I think most of us, or at least me, and I'd love to hear from our listeners if you have a totally different way of thinking about it. I see a lot of whether I'm working one-on-one with someone, whether I'm talking with a friend, whether I'm in my own head, whether it's like a company strategic planning session, it's easy to say, okay, we want to make this much. And then, whether there's a revenue goal and then we have a stretch goal, or we want to have this many people. And then here's this stretch goal, this like line, like the furthest horizon line of where you're trying to get. And I don't disagree that that's useful, but I think that a lot of times what actually might be more useful, and it really is a question, is identifying what we don't want to allow things to drop under. So I'll use a more personal example, like I can say, okay, I want to go to the gym 4 times a week. But I think it's almost more useful to draw the line in the sand of like, I will go at least 2 times. Like to know where your minimum, and especially with things, because when I think of the way I think of the things that I would love to do with, I think this is important. Okay, now I'm landing on where I think it's most important. I think this is most important potentially in areas where it's really easy to be expansive about what you want to do. Like if I think about everything that's important for when I want to show my kids, tell my kids, expose my kids to, that's a really long list.
Right.
So I think that case, it's almost too much. Whereas to like narrow it down to make sure I stay with what's truly important to me, I think it might be useful to identify the minimums of, I want to make sure they've seen at least one Broadway musical before, like a minimum, like minimum standards for things. I don't know. Is this making any sense?
It is. I think of it as a couple of different...
Good, because I was starting to panic that you were like, I got nothing, Jodi. You're on your own
and
here.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much for being here. No, I come at it, speaking of furrowed brows, I know you're going to look at me like this, because I come at it from what might be a different perspective. First, I think wrapped in there may be a differentiation between goals and habits, so that you could have a goal of being able to run a 5K or run a marathon, which is even more overwhelming. But I may know if I break it up, if I just make a habit of going to the gym 5 days a week and doing my workout, that I will be able to run that marathon in October of 2018, because it's less overwhelming to me knowing that I just have to hit the gym 4 days a week because I got my workout planned, and I don't have to worry about whether I can run however long a marathon is. I don't remember, 23.1 miles.
This is the conversation between 2 people who would never run marathons.
Never run a marathon.
I hate marathons.
But so one is goals versus habits, and the other thing that I thought about, where I thought you were going, is also with your client and his 7 different categories and 3 different sub goals. To me, that would organize me into paralysis. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example, which I will confess fully to you is off point, but I know, because I have great confidence in you can bring it back around to something relevant. But as you know, I had written a blog every week, and I really liked writing my blog column, and I brought in a marketing consultant, and she said, I love your blog. Your blog really gets a lot of traction. People are interested in it. Why don't we do, and then she laid out what reasonable marketing people do. She said, let's say that 1 month, this is the month we're going to do growth, and this is the month we're going to do HR, and this is the month we're going to do contracts, and this is the month we're going to do whatever. Mm-hmm. And we'll just do themes, and we can build social media and blogs and all that stuff around that. And as soon as it was organized to that extent, I stopped writing the blogs.
Right.
Because I would sit down at the computer and I would start writing because of something that was interesting or something I read or something that was bugging me or whatever.
In response to a stimuli.
In response to a stimulus, yes. Exactly. Yes. And the organization for me killed it. And I understand that you should have some organization, but the 7 overriding goals, 3 sub goals, to me, I'd look at it and then go get a donut.
Yeah, no, yeah. And it's interesting. It didn't seem to paralyze him, but what it did do was give him a constant low-grade hum of being not enough and like low-grade hum of failure. Okay. Not so much that he would say like, I am a failure,
right.
But it was always like, no matter how many boxes you were checking, there were still 94 other boxes that were being unchecked in that moment. And so, maybe it's as simple as prioritizing which are the most important, but that's still not what felt important to me about that. Yeah. Let me think about this for a second.
But there's also something, and I can guarantee you this is not what felt important to you, but it sounds like a successories where you should say, never be satisfied. And I object to that because, if you had 94 goals that you had to fulfill or you had to check off every day, you'd never be satisfied. You'd have that low hum of having missed the mark. Mm-hmm. And maybe that drives people. Maybe there are some people that are only propelled forward because they have that low hum of underachievement. Mm-hmm. But for me, it seems like if the carrot is always out of reach, there comes a time when it just begins to lose its appeal.
Yes. And great point. I think this is where part of it is knowing yourself, knowing which one of those people you are, because some people are driven forward by that kind of thing, by always feeling like the carrot's moving. Other people get paralyzed by it and just exhausted by it, frankly. So maybe it does tie back into, and I don't know if we've mentioned this before. If we have, too bad, you're going to hear it again. I once saw a pastor use this expression that I've just reused a million times since then, that in different contexts with my clients, with my kids, with family members, that he said, God loves us just the way we are, and he loves us too much to let us stay that way. And what I love about that is I fundamentally believe that if you really want to see somebody grow into something all they can be, you have to love them first the way they are. Like that's the sort of the foundational piece of it. And I think that might sound completely unrelated, but to me, it's the same kind of idea of, I love setting goals that are stretchy, that do sort of extend you beyond what you thought you could do. And I think it's really important to somehow know, and this is the crux, this is the exact crux of what I wanted to get into. Where is the setting to know, like, it's good enough without shutting off the drive to keep trying for more? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And what I'm also taken with, because we're putting it in first person singular, what works for me and I felt and I couldn't deal with. And I'm curious about your take when we look at that certain people are motivated by the 7 goals and the 3 sub goals and all of this stuff. Certain people are overwhelmed. Certain people like that low hum of what we've kind of jokingly called underachievement or underfulfillment, whatever you want to call it. And some people just, like me, would rather just go get a donut. So my question is, now you're a leader of a company.
Yeah.
And all of these
8 people with different things.
Yes, they have 8 different. So how do you obviously want people to use the cliche, you want them rowing in the same direction. You want them to understand what the goals of the organization are, but radically different things may motivate them to go that way. So what do you do to talk to leaders who are looking to motivate a staff?
I love that you asked that question. Like, I'm just going to open my mouth and there's like the answer.
If you do, we're going to have a lot of time to kill. If you can do this in 45 seconds, we're going to have a lot of silence. So feel free to take your time.
This is why leadership is hard, is that leadership wouldn't be hard if it was
cookie cutter.
If it was cookie cutter.
Everything I say, by the way, comes back to food because I'm hungry right now.
I can tell. We've got donuts,
yes,
you've got
donuts,
cookie cutters.
Yes.
How much of the pie can you have? No, I think that motivating people, I almost feel like we'd have to do a whole other episode on the art and science of motivation and engagement and for different, even with one person, and then you add in 10 people in a team. And so I'm going to reserve some of my thoughts just so that this doesn't become overwhelmingly rambly.
Yeah.
Like the binder of 1,000 goals. It would start to feel like that.
Nice callback.
Thank you. But I want to take the organizational piece to it is a very, very similar experience. Walked into another company for my first, actually, quick side note. Anyone who knows me personally and Elliot, knows I am not known for my poker face. It's not it's not my thing.
No, it's not.
No. I am not known for my poker face. And so sometimes when I'm first going into a place, I really have to strive for kind of a poker face, because sometimes things happen, like someone hands me a piece of paper and it says, here, we thought this would be helpful. Here are our 36 strategic initiatives for the year.
75 priorities.
Yeah. And it's hard to not crack. I'm like, okay.
That's one way to go.
36 strategic initiatives. But you can just, you can feel that, like where and how do you focus? And that is why this topic, why I wanted to bring it up, because there's something really tragic about creating that particular kind of uncertainty in an organization, because you end up with people running around putting a penny in 100 buckets versus knowing, like, if I have an hour, where do I spend my time? What matters? What needs my attention? What's at risk of falling below minimum standards, which is probably maybe where I came back to this, like, minimum goals, like what's dipping too low versus where do I have room to do even more? Because we do create these very stretch goal kind of scenarios. So it's always easy to see what could use more of your attention. And I don't know that there's as much awareness on what's dipping below the okay point. What's edging towards neglect.
Right. You don't have to keep the tank on full, but you need to know that there's a low gas indicator somewhere.
Ding. So that's the point that I was making in trying to get to in this point, is that I think it's useful to think about what's your low fuel light with the things that you're trying to do, with the things that are important to you. I would never argue against articulating those and planning them out and whatnot, but I see a lot of problems come up by not having that low fuel light gauge as well.
That actually, see, we're at like the
we're both excited
18-minute mark, and the whole episode now makes sense to me. I understand.
We were both confused up until that point.
I know, but I see that it's crystal clear, because you're right. It's not that I have to be in shape to run a marathon. That may be my stretch goal. That may be fine. But there is a low fuel indicator on my health or my nutrition or my stamina, whatever I view as important in that facet of my existence. I should understand the effort and the discipline necessary to keep that low fuel indicator off. Yeah.
Because, and I think it comes back to, because you can't, I often use this analogy or metaphor, gosh, I can't remember which one's which, of like the stereo equalizer. You can't put everything to a 10 all the time. You have part of the art of being really effective and leading and guiding an organization and guiding people and in your own life is knowing which things they have to move around. Like sometimes you move things up to a 10. That means other things have to come down to like a 2 or 3. There's a book called The One Thing, and it's one of my 2 favorite books on time strategy, The One Thing and Essentialism. Those are the 2. But in The One Thing, he talks about how a lot of the different balls in your life, if you drop them, they bounce. But then like there are certain ones that break if you drop them, and being aware of like, like your personal relationships and whatnot. And so being aware of what's dipping too low, what might actually break, what if it bounces, I can't catch it again. And I just lost my train of thought.
Well, so first, and in that pause, I just can't let the irony go by of the fact that the one thing is one of your two favorites.
Okay.
I just had to interject that.
Wah, wah, wah. That's like a dad joke a little bit, I have to say.
But I am a dad joke. But it's right there. It would have been rude not to pick up on that.
Fair enough.
And maybe your use of the equalizer is part of the answer that addresses, when you're looking at a team, because you have to acknowledge, just as we do for individual leaders, that different people have different stimuli, different behaviors, and also in your organization, different goals, which means that their low fuel indicators are at different levels. And maybe that's a helpful way to point out that everybody has to maintain a certain level of something, whether it's responsiveness or what have you. But the person in position X, she really has to pay attention to one of the knobs or levers on the equalizer, whereas another position has a completely different setting, and it's not homogeneous, and it's not just in one policy.
Yeah, and as you said that, the other thing that clicked for me is this distinction, that whenever you say like these two things are super important, we're putting these things up to a 10, they need our all hands on deck on moving these things forward toward that goal or that stretch goal. It is at that moment that you have to, on the other things that are sort of moving to the back burner, you have to be clear on literally thinking of it, moving it to the back burner. How would we know if the water was gone and it was starting to smoke? Like it's that minimum. That's what it is. Knowing what your minimum okayness is on things whatever. Knowing what that minimum line in the sand, your low fuel indicator, allows you to put things on the back burner safely, I think. And then they can hum there, knowing where that line is, where it's too little, so that you can direct your resources and energy towards the things that you move forward. So I think of it as like an energy management kind of tool.
And I think that one of the things that you had said earlier really points to, we talked about the low fuel indicator, but one of the things you said earlier really points to, okay, where do I devote my resources? Where for my position, do I have to keep those levels at a 10? And it's not low fuel. There's one priority or maybe two initiatives that I really need to keep it. And you framed it, if I have an hour, where would I spend that time? Or even to stretch it out a little bit, because people might be able to find an hour. If I had a free day, if I had a block day, and I had one thing to devote that time to, where should I spend it? For each person in your organization, it might be a different answer. And if they're correctly aligned, that's fine. But so I think the importance is the low fuel indicators for each person, and then the high energy indicator. Where do I have to really dial it up to a 10? You know
where else this I think is really important, as we were talking about teams, I think it still applies, is knowing who on your team needs your attention. Because I think it's easy, when you're blessed with somebody on the team who just kind of rolls, and they don't need much of your attention because they're doing everything right. They get sort of not put on the back burner necessarily, but I have to pay attention to Bob because he really needs my help, and he needs the encouragement, or he needs the training, or whatever it is. It's just another place where knowing where that fuel indicator light comes on, because, we leave Janice humming along because she's doing great, but where's that level where, she needs some attention or focus, or, that's similar but different. But
I know exactly where you're going, but this is the point where I reserve the right to say there's a whole nother episode in, whether this one person who's just doing great doesn't get the kind of attention. I know. Because sometimes whether it's people within your organization or your clients, a lot of times the the bad clients push out the good clients.
Oh yeah, we totally have to do an episode. Can you write that down just so I don't forget?
I wrote it, but I can't understand my own handwriting, so we'll have to type it at some point.
That's right. Gotcha.
Yeah, but that's right. I mean, we really have to focus where our resources go as far as the other people on the team, and so that's why you have to know where their equalizers are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I end up thinking of it as like a two-step thing, kind of. Knowing, actually, you know what? It's exactly the way I think of, I have this one bank account that we have to keep X amount of dollars in so you don't pay the fee or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think of that as almost our other zero.
Right.
If that makes any sense. That is how I think about this goal setting technique of knowing where your like second zero is, that's enough that you're not going to regret some amount of feeling like you neglected something, and then having the goal that's above that. But to me, it's a really important, way to not let yourself off the hook. That's not the point of like, okay, that's good enough, but it just feels like an important piece so that you don't end, because otherwise I think it feels all or nothing.
It does, and I'm going to go back. This is an interesting trick because I'm actually going to add something to it without expanding on it at all. But I just have to bring this up because you think of it as a new zero. I think of it as Top Gun. In Top Gun, they had the flight exercises. They were doing these dog fights, and they would always tell you what the hard deck is, and the hard deck would be 500 feet above ground level or whatever it is, 250 feet. Meaning for them, that's the zero. You can't go below that. They didn't want to say, well, you just can't hit the ground because that would be bad. So they would set the level, and it was as if you went below, you hit ground.
Yeah, exactly.
If you went below that. So it's the same thing with your, and I do that as well with the bank accounts. I'll take a look for the business bank account saying, look, I might have for whatever reason, a low revenue month and a high payable month, but I'm not going to go below the hard deck of whatever's in there.
No, I love that. And I think what it gives you is the freedom and the space to, again, I guess it's kind of an energy management thing, is that otherwise you have the same anxiety level of moving towards a goal, whether, if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, if there's no sort of like, okay, 2 or 3 is the hard deck, then you just always feel like it's never enough. I don't know. It's just creating sort of levels of safety, not safety. I don't know. That's not quite the right word, but I'm having a really hard time articulating this, but I think you get it.
No, I do. Okay. I think there are certain, depending upon the different facet, I think there are levels of fulfillment, and sometimes they're at a 2 and sometimes they're at a 9.
Oh, you know what it is? It's because I never really tied it in, and this is what ties it in for me. When I brought up the quote about like loves you just the way you are and loves you too much to let you stay that way, to me, it creates a foundation, a really solid foundation of like, okay, I got that much. That's enough that like no matter what, that's taken care of. So I can, but then that if you identify that and know when you get to that point, then you're standing on sort of like a next level up, solid ground that I think actually makes it easier to then get to the stretch goals. That's what I think is so valuable about this, of knowing that where all of the hard decks are, to use your version of it, with your goals, means that when you're there, I feel like you then stand on something more solid than if you're just sort of like reaching.
And, I'd be interested, you said right at the beginning of at the episode that you'd be interested in hearing how people view 7 goals, 3 sub goals, or whether they're overwhelmed, whether they're inspired by it, and how they deal with it. And I would just want to wrap up by encouraging people to let us know. We've gotten, one of the things that's really gratifying about this is that we've started to get some really great feedback. And the way you give feedback is email us. One of the ways is talk to us at sohere'smystory.com. You can go on our Facebook page at SHMS Podcast. Hit us up on Twitter at SHMS Podcast, because we're getting some really great engagement, and it's helping us to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. The other option you have for that is just recording a quick voice memo and then emailing it to us. That works as well. We love hearing your stories. And next week, we are going to introduce the new segment. And we're calling, there's going to be a lot of different things that fall under this segment, but it's So Here's Your Story. So our first kickoff will be the My Awkward Interview. And then, and actually, do you want to say just a quick thing about what the next segment, the next hashtaggy segment thing we're going to do?
Okay, go ahead.
It's the, and you, I don't think this is going to say it quite right, but it's the things I wish people knew, if people knew this about my industry. Or
right, if people only knew this about my job.
Yeah, if people only knew this about my job. And what we're looking for, actually say a little bit about it. Because
we're looking for whether they're funny, quirky, scary, odd, whatever it is. But every job has a trick or a knack to it or a hidden talent required to do it well or a, geez, I had no idea that was involved kind of moment. That's what we're looking for. Yeah.
If you have no idea what we're talking about, we'll say a little bit more about that next time, but we're also welcoming those stories. Because I think most professions have sort of a romanticized external view of them, that miss some of like the odd, weird things. Like if people only knew that as an accountant, this happens, or we've already heard a couple, and that's what sparked it. One was about some of the things that happen with flight attendants. I started to say stewardesses.
Oh no!
I'm showing my age. With flight attendants, and what was the other one? I've gotten a couple great ones about sort of gallows humor in certain, in some industries that that's kind of how they make it through. Things like that, just things that are either just funny or people might even say, "Oh my gosh!" Right. So that will be our next one for So Here's Your Story.
Right, and so we've told you how to reach us. There is one other thing. That yes, there is. And that is, if you would like to become a patron, we would love to have you. Go to our site at Patreon, patreon.com. Look up So Here's My Story, and you'll see all the cool additional extra stuff. And we're adding to that all the time for our patrons. So that's our story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for everyone who's listening in, and we're especially grateful to all of our patrons who've joined us over at patreon.com to support our efforts here. And we hope to see you next week.
And listen, having told our story, we'd love to hear yours.
Ooh, yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, the floor is yours. Go to sohere'smystory.com and join the conversation.
Wait, before you go, there are 3 things that we really want you to know.
First, you can find show notes and links to all of the random things we happen to mention during the episode by visiting our website, sohere'smystory.com.
The second thing is, we like to talk.
And not just to each other.
That's right. So what we really want to hear is your story. So while you're there, you'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to contact us with questions, suggestions, or even to share your own story.
And if you love the show and want to support future episodes, you'll also find the link to our Patreon page where we share our extra bonus content.
Or if you can't support us financially, it'd be great if you could leave us a 5-star review at iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use to listen to us. And be sure to tell all your friends.
Until next time.